We're going to spend a bit of time considering the concept of the kingdom of God. This is a very difficult term to define. It's perhaps easiest to begin by considering what the kingdom of God is not. Firstly, the kingdom of God is not heaven. The kingdom of God is not a spiritual place above and beyond this physical world. It's not a spiritual dimension that our souls go to once we're dead. It's true that Jesus does talk of the kingdom of heaven, and he uses the terms kingdom of God and kingdom of heaven interchangeably. He's referring to exactly the same thing. But when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, he's not talking about somewhere up there, above and beyond this place. He's talking rather of God's place coming and touching our place and transforming our physical existence. He's talking not so much about souls going to be with God in heaven. He's talking much more about God coming down from heaven to our world and changing this place where we find ourselves. So the kingdom of God is not heaven. Secondly, the kingdom of God is not a geographical reality. We talk of the United Kingdom to refer to a particular place, a particular locality, or particular group of territories: England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. But the kingdom of God is not a kingdom in the way that the United Kingdom is. There isn't a particular geographic locality where you can go and there find the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is wherever God's rule is recognized on the earth. Whenever people submit to God's rule in their lives, whenever they recognize that God is their king, whenever they live their lives in obedience to his commands and seek to honor him in the way that they live out their lives in this physical world, that's where the kingdom of God is to be found, says Jesus. And when people submit to the rule of God in their lives and become members of God's kingdom, they come under the blessing of his rule. They come to experience a peace. The Hebrew word is the word shalom, which means wholeness, completeness. They come to step into an experience of life as it's truly meant to be lived. Now, what's so extraordinary about Jesus' teaching on the kingdom in the New Testament is that Jesus blew apart people's popular notions of what the kingdom was all about. You see, in the first century, most of the Jews were looking forward to a time in the future when the kingdom of God would be established on earth, when the will of God would be done on earth as it is in heaven, to use Jesus' own words from the Lord's Prayer. And they believed that this would come about at some point in the future, when God would decisively do away with all his enemies, come and establish his dominion on the earth. The Messiah would inaugurate the kingdom of God, and the whole earth would be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea. God's peace would be experienced by all peoples on the earth. The Jews were looking to a time in the future when this would happen, but Jesus came with a surprising message. He said, I tell you, the kingdom of God is not something you have to wait for in the future. The kingdom of God is at hand. The kingdom of God is imminent. The kingdom of God is present in the here and now. Because I have now arrived and I am God's chosen Messiah, I am God's means of establishing his kingdom on the earth. The kingdom of God is something that you can come to know in your lives in the here and now. You can become members of God's kingdom now. This was an extraordinary message. As far as we know, there was no other first century Jew that was saying anything like it. And in saying that he had come to establish God's kingdom, Jesus was clearly making a pronouncement that he was the long-awaited Messiah, the one that God's people had been looking forward to for centuries.